Hi, man. Well, again, man, nice having you. Pleasure having you. I've been a fan of yours from a distance for a bit, and I remember one thing you said, which is why I was like really excited to talk to you, man. Like it took you, I don't know, like 20 or 30 years to finally feel comfortable in being yourself. So let's start there, man. When people tell you about authenticity, or when people tell you to be your most authentic self, like what comes to mind for you? What does that mean for you?
I think what it means is just being, it really depends, right? Because everyone has and I'll just mention the internet for a second. I think everyone has their own approach to the internet and what they share and what they don't share. And I think that's perfectly fine, right? Like everyone is not going to be able to or not going to want to share every single detail of their life, may share 50%, right? May share only the good moments, may share only the bad moments. But I do think it's important, in whatever kind of like position that you're in, if you do have like some sort of public image, let's say, for you to be able to kind of be as transparent as possible, because I think in the generation that we're in at the moment, it's really focused on kind of seeing the highlights and kind of seeing the best moments, but it's not necessarily focused on kind of seeing the process and the road to get there, right? We tend to kind of just kind of bury our bad moments because we may feel shame, may feel embarrassed. But those bad moments really do lead to a lot of the great, breakthroughs that you have as an individual. So I think being your authentic self, whether it's your friends, whether it's with your partner, whether it's at work, they're all three different things, right? And they all take three different approaches. But the best possible way that you can be authentic in each is really something that you as a person only know. And at that point, it's really up to you to kind of like realize, um, what how open you want to be, because I think a lot of times we repress, and um, a lot of times we repress, and a lot of times we assume. So in that repression, we kind of assume things of other people instead of just kind of being open and transparent about what it is we want, what we want to say, what we want to do. So I think it's almost like, you put yourself in a space where um, you create stories in your head when you can just kind of really tell the story in your head and kind of get ahead after that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's interesting you mentioned the word repress, and what were some of those early experiences where you felt like you were repressing parts of your identity?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get to your like professional life, your work life, right? I think automatically, and it's interesting because I actually started off when I graduated from college. I only worked at companies that were either focused on Latino media or Black media. So I was never in rooms with like white folks outside of like college, right? And maybe like a retail job that I worked while I was in college. So in a professional setting, I was really kind of used to being around us in a sense, right? So when I got to, I think CBS was my first real like corporate job, and I was sort of higher up at that point. It was definitely different because I realized I couldn't walk around the office and like, just do normal things that we as people of color do, and we're open. Like I remember in my last office, I would like listen to music loud. I would just like, kind of like just talk about like really open to like topics that are open to us, like about race, about discrimination, about culture, about social justice. And those are things that I immediately missed because you didn't necessarily know who would be willing to kind of talk about those things and who would, right? And then you're always kind of sensitive when there is a race issue come up and you're like, do I jump into this? Do I not jump into this? What do I really think about this? So I think when I got to those companies, when I got to CBS and then now being at the New York Times, like it was definitely I don't want to say it was a culture shock. It was more me learning how to kind of like learn them and learn how to kind of like navigate the space as a person of color. And what I think what really kind of helped me, and I was actually talking to a mentee yesterday about this type of stuff because she's working at a company where she's the only Black woman on staff, and she's a college graduate. And she was talking to me about just like, I don't really know anyone here. I just started the job, but I started the job remote, which is even more different, right? Like you're not physically in front of people. You can't grab them like at the, at the water cooler or anything of the sorts, the lunchroom, just kind of chat with them. So, what really kind of worked for me was really kind of seeking out as many people as I can. Um, so when I got to those jobs, what I immediately did was, I sat down with one person, and then I would ask that person, give me like 5 names that I should sit down with. And I kept going, like, give me 5 names, until I got to like maybe 30 to 40. And it was a mix of people, right? It was a mix of people of color. It was also people who weren't, right? And what that was able to do for me, because I think as people of color, when you enter majority white organizations, you have imposter syndrome. You start believing you don't belong there, even though you've done so much to kind of get to this point, or just in your career in general, right? And what ended up happening was, having those conversations with people in my first 2 months, at least at the times, was super beneficial because it kind of calmed me down. It allowed me to hear the perspectives of people of color at the organization. And then at the same time, it made me realize that I don't have to hit a home run on day one, or I don't have to hit a home run on month one, right? And I think a lot of times when you get into a place and it's not the most diverse place on earth, you think you're like the representative for all Dominicans, or all Puerto Ricans, or all Jamaicans, or whatever, right? And it's like you put this crazy pressure on yourself. But that, everyone's kind of different, and everyone kind of approaches things differently. I'm super open at work, but I know I've become more open at work as I've become, I don't want to say more powerful, but more of a leader at work. And I think that's allowed me to become a little more comfortable in a way that I think for a lot of people, as they get higher, they repress a lot more because they're more protective of it. And I feel like my personality has always been one that's really jokey and easygoing, but jokey and easygoing in a way that's not offensive either, right? So I feel like a lot of like, me just chatting or making jokes in the office is not necessarily something that's viewed as a negative, but just viewed as part of my personality. And I wanted to include that. Do I talk about everything and anything that I've always wanted to talk about in the office in ways that I did 10 years ago at Black companies and Latino companies? No, but I think you're probably never going to be 100% your full self unless you own a place, right? I think if you can get to 50 to 75% in a very like, top down white company, I think that's actually pretty good, because there's a lot of people that just repress, and it really kind of affects their job as a whole, or just not being open. And I know it's tough.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting, man, because I often feel that pressure as well. Like I put that pressure on myself. I'm like, yo, I got to do a good job, because if I don't do a good job, they're not going to hire another Latino, or they're not going to hire another Black person here.
Absolutely.
But like no one's legit telling me that, but it's like some of the stories that I tell myself.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting when you mention imposter syndrome too, because like a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome in the sense of that voice inside of our head that is like, yo, you don't belong here. And we're all like, we always compare up, but we never compare down as well, whatever down means, right? But in many ways, like I've also been told that I don't belong there. You know what I mean?
Really, yeah.
In so many words, you know what I mean? Like
words,
handing somebody like your PowerPoint slide, and they're like, the slide looks ghetto. Can you fix that? I'm just like, all right. Interesting choice of words. Or
very interesting choice of words.
Or like I'll tell somebody about my weekend, and they're like, oh, those are the places you go out to? Meanwhile, it's the same people that go to Burning Man, but I can't go uptown and
exactly. And have like be at a regular concert or party. Yeah.
Yeah. But what was imposter syndrome like for you, man? Because it's something that everyone goes through, but many times you feel alone in that situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the main thing about imposter syndrome for me was, and I think I really, when I got to CBS and the Times, it really kind of, heightened, because that was my first time working at predominantly white companies, right? And I just felt like, a dot in like this whole like sea, right? In terms of just being like one of the only people of color. And when I got there, I went through it's so crazy because you go through like such a strenuous interview process. You interview like 7 times, 8 times, literally at both places I did. And I knew like interview 4 or 5 that they wanted me. Unless I like completely, tripped up in an interview or anything like that, I knew they wanted to hire me, and they were just kind of like, introducing me to different people and different people as I go, right? People that I would probably interact with on some level. And I remember the first day I started, it's almost like I forgot that they wanted me, that they put me through 8 interviews, that I did everything that I did before this, right? And I think for me at CBS, what really kind of stood out was that, like I mentioned, I was at these different companies before that were centered around people of color, and then I moved to a white company. And sometimes you have like this conditioning in your head that white companies are better or whatever it may be. Like you have this conditioning, right? Like they're bigger, they have more budget, more resources. So it's like, all right, like they're gonna figure me out in 2 weeks, and they're gonna get rid of me, and they're gonna be like, oh, I should have hired this dude or this girl. And it was rough. I mean, I think at CBS, it was actually a longer acclimation period than it was at the Times. And I think it was because there were less people of color there. And I just didn't, I think sometimes when you don't see a lot of you, it's hard to trust the people in front of you, right? Like, even if they're not malicious or not, really like out to get you or anything, it's like hard to really kind of confide in people and what's going on with you. And it probably took me like 4 to 5 months, because every day I was like, trying to like hit a home run, trying to like make this big thing. I would get frustrated when people wouldn't listen to my ideas, and not frustrated in a bad way, but sort of like, are they doing this because I'm a Black guy? Are they doing this because I'm a Latino? Whatever, right? Like all these things, right? And then those things start playing in your head when, I'm not saying that it can't be true or it could not be true, right? But it may not even be a thought in their head. They may just be like, I don't want to do it. You know what I mean? So I really had to get to a place, and therapy kind of really helped me with this, specifically in this job. Like it really kind of helped me, kind of like stop creating stories in my head. Because when I was getting turned down for things, again, I felt like they were out to get me. They didn't want to help me. This place was never going to change or listen to my recommendations. And I did start making a lot of like friends within the office and people that were like, encouraging, and that really helped me. But therapy probably helped me the most, because what it really kind of got me to was a system of kind of like tracking my weeks, right? So I started tracking like everything that happened in my week, whether it was something that was not the most positive and something that was positive. And it didn't have to be like something results oriented, right? It didn't have to be like, oh, like I pitched this article and it got 8 billion views. It was more like, hey, you sat down with, the editor in chief, or you sat down with the product manager, and they, you had a good conversation with them. And before this, you weren't meeting with anyone, right? So like that to me, and that to my therapist at the time, was a step of growth, right? So what she wanted me to do was more so, let's look at accomplishments like, these big things that are company goals, and look at them as you start off as little things that you're doing that are taking you out of your comfort zone. And I think that's the philosophy that I took to the Times, right? Where when I started, it was like, oh, I'm going to meet with all these people to kind of get myself comfortable and acclimated. And even though I still had that imposter syndrome when I got to the Times, it kind of dissipated much quicker. And, one of the things that, I always try to tell people, and I've had to learn this myself, is that, it's almost like an experiment of like repeating to yourself to remember who the hell you are, right? It doesn't mean that, no one's saying you're Jay-Z or Beyonce, but like in your own life, you've done a lot. You've come from situations that are probably much harder than a lot of your colleagues. And you were able to kind of like, surpass those situations and get to the place you are, and really just kind of understand that you belong here. And at the same time, that you're not responsible, like if you end up doing bad at a job, like, it doesn't mean that the company is going to say, well, we hired him we gave him a shot. We're not going to hire anymore, this color, going forward. So it's really just kind of like taking the pressure off yourself. And that's hard.
Yeah.
But I think like the mental exercise of just really kind of understanding that, you're there for you. You're not there for the broader population is what's important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so much of that resonated, man. I mean, I feel like sometimes you just need someone to tell you that you're not crazy. Going back to that earlier example where you're in a meeting, you say something no one listens to you, but literally some other dude says the same exact thing with less data to back it up. And they're like,
Yeah.
he's a genius.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you look around and sometimes, like, I remember being in that situation. I was like, nah, I'm bugging. They just didn't hear me. I'm gonna say it louder next time. And then I remember I would like say things a bit louder. And like my biggest thing, and therapy helped me as well, man. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Like my biggest thing was in those moments, I couldn't communicate my emotions and how I was feeling to my teammates. So I really wanted to tell my teammates, instead of being like, yo, y'all not listening to me, I want to say, I'm feeling unheard. I'm feeling like you all don't appreciate the value that I'm putting in, which is a way more constructive conversation than like, yo, what the fuck, B? Y'all not listening? You know what I mean? So I feel like most people don't get to that point where they communicate that, and then they're seen as the angry insert whatever adjective. Exactly. And I got to that point, to the aggressive stereotypical thing, before I got to the point where I could communicate my emotions, which is really unfortunate.
No, that's super smart, man. Like the whole thing about, words matter, right? Even in like the most non-threatening situations, right? Like just being able to reframe, like, I feel, why aren't you listening to me, is much different than I feel unheard, right? And it doesn't come off, and it's an excellent point that you made. It doesn't come off as like I'm upset. It just comes off as like, I want to do well, but I just feel like, no one's really kind of like giving me the ear that I need. So it doesn't feel like you're, complaining. It feels like you're being transparent in a different way,
Exactly. And it's interesting too, man. You mentioned that at first you were kind of nervous or even like fearful to say certain things, or you were fearful and like confiding in certain people. I'm wondering if that has to do with some of that like self-pressure that you were putting on yourself, or is it has to do with like potentially like a previous experience that made you sort of like suppress a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, I think for me, it wasn't really like a previous experience. It was more, it was more like when you get into a corporate environment and you really start off at first, you really don't know who knows who, right? Everyone knows everyone, but you don't really know the extent of their relationships, right? So it really kind of prevented me at first from really kind of sharing with people, and sharing with people in the same way that you just mentioned, sort of like, hey, like I'm struggling with this, or hey, I'm feeling unheard in this situation. And I think that's kind of what affected me. And I think actually when I started sharing with people, surprisingly, and maybe this was, strategic on my part, was when I started figuring out who was who and who had what relationships with who, right? So when I started realizing like, all right, like this person that doesn't have that much access to this person or that person, or I don't feel as, it almost felt like it almost felt like for me, and this is being sincere, I confided in people who I felt didn't have the most access to higher ups. But I also confided in those people because they were open to listening to me as well. So it was kind of twofold. Like there were those individuals that would kind of like say like, hey man, I'm listening to your ideas. I really wish we could do it, but he makes the decisions or she makes the decisions. But I think for me, like strategically at first, it was more so about, who is like buddy in this place. And like, if I say something to her or him, like, is it going to travel to him or her? So it was a lot of like really studying people then after you kind of like run through that period where you're like not worried about like what you accomplished today, then I think I got to a place where I naturally kind of let my guard down. I became a little more open. I became a little more talkative. And that was my own process, right? Like it wasn't really anything that anyone else did. It was just kind of me kind of letting, the guard down. And then I started talking to people who I felt like really comfortable with, and people that I felt like listened to me or at least collaborated with me. And that's when I was able to kind of build relationships and feel more comfortable in the environment that I was in.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too, man, because people think like one thing is like being in a predominantly white space, but you also talked about like you worked at companies that, majority of the people looked like you. But I've always had
Yeah.
the fantasy that like, yo, if I work for like a company where like everybody looks like me, it's gonna be all good. But like people don't understand, because I had a homegirl that worked at Univision, and she was telling me it's
Okay.
not what you think, man. Like just because you work around a lot of Hispanics or Latinos, Latinas, there's still levels to the Latinidad. You know what I mean? There's still
Oh yeah, for sure.
like she was being called ghetto because she was from the Bronx compared to people from that were Latina, but they were from like Westchester. Or there's like the colorism, or there's the classism with
Hmm.
wealth, or the music. Like it's not all perfect just because you work around a lot of people that look like you, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, and that's something that I talk about a lot in terms of like colorism in Spanish
Mhm.
speaking, communities or Latino communities in
Spanish
general. Um,
language as well, man. That's another one.
Spanish language as well. Yeah. So it's, I think, one of the experiences that I kind of have gone through at work is that like I'm part of two ERG groups. Obviously, I'm Dominican, but I'm part of the Black ERG group. I'm part of the Latino ERG group. And it's something that I just wanted to do. I felt fine in both groups, right? And it's interesting because you have like it's so interesting. Like we don't really sit in the office anymore, but when we sat in the office, there would be people, hey, like I need a Spanish speaker. And like everyone knows in the office that I speak Spanish, and they would just like fly right by me. And I think they would fly right by me because they don't envision me as a stereotypical looking Latino person, right? And that would always kind of like, like bother me because I'm like, hey, like I can speak Spanish, right? With these individuals knowing, but I think from a phenotype level, they're looking for someone who looks like A-Rod or looks like J-Lo, right? To kind of speak or to kind of translate whatever it may be. So that was something that I definitely went through at work or have gone through at work. And even in what I do, like I find it interesting because, I'm in a space which is called SEO, which there's not a lot of people of color to begin with, right? And then there's not a lot of people of color who speak Spanish additionally, right? So I've been doing a lot of like teaching overseas. And, well, this goes back to like what we were talking about, like the assumptions we make in our head, but sometimes the assumptions we make in our head are accurate ones. I know I've been in conversation with a lot of people who live in Spain and Europe, for example, and people who live in Latin America as well. And they never knew who did SEO for the New York Times. And I think the last thing in their mind was like, it would be a dude that speaks Spanish. And then I think the last thing in their minds was it would be a dark skinned dude that speaks Spanish, right? And sometimes I can, when I've been on calls, not that anything's ever been said, but there's a very like, wow, like, how did you get here? But like, how did you get here? Not in like a, hey, we really want to know how you got, like, I think there is a sincerity to it, but I also think there's like, even if they may not acknowledge it, there's like, it's rooted in a little bit of like race, right? Or racism or whatever. Or they're like, damn, like he speaks Spanish, he made it there, like, so why am I not there, right? And it's like this automatic like comparison, competitive game.
Mhm.
Um, so I think I've even seen it, even when I do kind of like the freelance work outside of the Times. But yeah, to what your friend said, I mean, I worked at companies where Black companies and Latino companies where the higher ups were all lighter skinned in both, right?
Mhm.
And really were kind of putting roadblocks to certain people's kind of progress within there. And then you see like certain things that wouldn't be covered. And if they were going to be covered, like say things about Afro-Latinidad or anything of the sorts, they really wanted to cover it in a safe way versus really a transparent, honest way that would really kind of move the conversation. So, um, I think sometimes people forget about, color within the color dynamics within groups of people of color, and how there's, just like we look at telenovelas on Univision, a lot of these people could walk down the street and you'd be like, oh, they're white, right? So
Mhm.
like, if we think they're white, how do you think they envision themselves when they're, Mexico or Colombia or anywhere
Mhm.
else? So it's understanding that even within our cultures, there are people who still have privilege that sort of white people have in some respects.
Yeah, like they could. I mean, there's so many examples of this, but I think
Mhm.
like the example that always sticks out to my head. Do you know Mark Pritchard?
No, no. Mm-mm.
Oh man, I gotta send you this. But he's essentially the CMO of P&G, but
Okay.
he, it's weird to say he came out, but
Mhm.
like he legit came out at like this conference on diversity as Mexican. And
Really?
like his quote, I mean, I'll send you a picture, man, but he looks like a white man. But he said that
Hmm.
he hid his Mexican identity or never like admitted to that himself being Mexican was because he was scared of just like whatever people would say or like that people would negatively impact his career, etc. And
Yeah.
I mean, this is like the head of brand at P&G. Like this is a powerful man. And it took him to
Hmm.
get to that point to be able to like quote unquote come out. And like if it's difficult for him to do that, like
Oh
imagine
yeah.
any of us embracing like who we are or even telling people we listen to reggaeton or whatever.
Yeah. Absolutely. I didn't even know that story, and yeah, it just kind of shows the how it affects different people in different ways, right? Like, um, his last name is Pritchard. I think it was an adopted name, right, or something like that. So
Maybe, yeah.
it just kind of shows you like whether it's the benefit, the detriment, whatever it may be, however you may view it, um, people either run towards it or run away from it for their own reasons, um, despite the fact that they still know deep down inside who they are, you know?
Yeah. I'm
Hmm.
I'm curious too, like if it was comfortable for you to embrace at a simple level, like go to both ERG meetings. Cause I remember for me, man,
Yeah.
like it was Facebook has this event. It's called like Black Leadership Day. They also have Latino Leadership Day. They have Pride
Hmm.
Leadership Day. All these different groups, right? And
Hmm.
it's a dope event. Like they fly all the employees that self-identify as either all these groups fly you out, and it's like every single person that self-identifies as such goes to headquarters, and it's just like a dope event, dope speakers.
Hmm.
And like I remember my first year at Facebook, I was having a really difficult time, imposter syndrome, all the things we discussed, and it took me to go to Black Leadership Day first for me to be like, yo, there are VPs and all this stuff, all these people that like swag surfing on stage, but they're like doing really well at work as well. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Hmm.
And it took that representation for me to be like, yo, I could be myself. But I remember like weeks before that, my boy was like, yo, why didn't you sign up? And I was like, I've always had this like difficult time with identity, specifically like I self-identifying as Black, because I remember growing up, like I was just raised to be like, oh, you're Dominican. Like no one said like
Yeah.
you're
It's
Black or
very
even
nationalistic. Yeah. Hmm.
exactly. And like
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't hear the word diaspora, African
Hmm.
diaspora until like college. So it
Yeah.
wasn't until college where I was like, oh shit, like okay, like
Hmm.
Dominicans, some, depending on where you are in the island, et cetera, like actually Black and
Correct.
all, not just Spain, et cetera. So I was
Hmm.
just like, yo, and then that was sort of like reinforced with in that opportunity at work. And I was just like, oh shit, like let me take this opportunity. But I feel like for so long, like we isolate ourselves culturally
Yeah.
where we
Hmm.
don't embrace all parts of our culture and identity, and we miss out
Hmm.
on certain opportunities like external but also just like internal and just like knowing who we are. And there's this Cardi B quote that always sticks with me when I think about identity. She said it was a conversation where she was being asked about Afro Latinidad, and she was like,
Hmm.
um clearly I wasn't made from two white people fucking, which is hilarious. But it's really interesting, man. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've struggled with that for a while. I think from lack of education and awareness of the
Hmm.
history, man. But what about you? Have you also
Yeah.
struggled with
Yeah.
that as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I first got to the Times, I I think I was at a point of acceptance, right? And acceptance in a way of like when I was growing up, there was still a very like, you're Dominican, you're Dominican, you're Dominican,
Hmm.
right? Like very nationalistic. It's almost like you wouldn't even know where Dominicans like derive from, right? It's just like we're Dominican, right? It's almost like a race, right? The way we kind of like talk about it in
Yeah.
a sense, right? It's like you're like, whatever. It's like black, white, Dominican, right? Asian.
Yeah.
So it's so nationalistic that you grow up, speaking Spanish, so you automatically are just like, yeah, I'm Latino, right? Whatever.
Hmm.
And I think it took me definitely a lot of time to kind of embrace Blackness as a whole, and it didn't have anything to do with like outside experiences or anything of the sort. It's just, um, it was something that I was kind of like, that was kind of pointed out to me, because I was probably one of like the few dark skinned Dominicans in class. So it was kind of made to be something that like was made to kind of like single me out and shame me. So at that point, what it made me kind of do was run away from Blackness. So I was growing up as a teenager, maybe early 20s. It's not that I would necessarily say, it's not that I would necessarily say that I was, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Surprise.
Not it, but I would kind of like move away from it, right? Like it wasn't something that I was willing to accept because it was kind of told to me in such a negative way. And I really didn't know much about it, to be honest with you. I just knew complexion and all that other stuff. And then as time went on, therapy, just really kind of reading, just kind of learning about yourself, that's kind of when I started to just accept it more and understand more about it, and not shy away from that, I would say identification in a sense. Because for a really long time, it was something that I did not on any level want to embrace because of how it made me feel. But what I kind of had to realize was that that's the way those people made me feel for their own ignorant reasoning, right? But everyone that's in my life, whether they're Black American, Dominican American, Dominican, never made me feel that way about me or Blackness in general. And that's really kind of when I said, you know what, like, this isn't negative. It was just made, they were just doing it to make me feel lower than whatever than them, when there's nothing to feel lower about. And when I got to the Times, there wasn't there were ERG groups I don't think there were ERG groups at CBS. There were like specific events and stuff. But when I got to the Times, it just felt like more like community. For me, it was just like, yeah, I identify as either or. But at the same time, I just felt like I wanted to be in the two groups and kind of meet different people, and embrace things. Because again, to what you mentioned about the Cardi B line, right? Like, I obviously didn't come from two white people. So, it kind of comes down to that. And I was just, and it's been a positive, like the relationships that I've built in the office have not only helped me professionally, but personally as well. And I think just kind of expanding your network when you're in a place like that is important. Whether you 100% feel part of that group or you don't.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, ERGs have been really helpful for me. It's funny, I still get hit with the because it's not just like going to certain events, or sometimes you lead events with some of these ERGs. And I remember one of my coworkers said, "Oh, must be nice to allocate time to both of them." Like, all right, unnecessary.
Unnecessary, yeah.
It's so interesting too, man, because people don't realize sometimes, like when I started working at Facebook, like that's when, so like because I work there, like everyone adds each other on social media. So it's not only like me being myself at work, but now people are seeing like what I do outside of work as well. And like that's a whole nother element. And I thought about as well, because you're so vocal, like vocally as well, but also like digitally in a lot of the writing that you do, right? And a lot of these are very personal experiences, but you never really know how people are going to react. Are they going to be like, "Oh my God, Claudio, tell me about like blah, blah." People want to talk to you, right? But like you're showing a whole nother side of you that a lot of people don't see at work. Like, was it scary, like hitting that enter button to hit submit, that first time?
Oh, 100%, bro. Like I remember I was talking to my girlfriend about it at the beginning of 2020. And I was just like, hey, because I used to have a blog that was doing really well a decade ago, a long time ago. And I just stopped writing because I just wasn't in the like zone for it. And
similar
I remember
topics.
Similar topics like, self-help, career stuff, colorism, all that stuff. And I remember telling my girlfriend, you know what, I'm gonna give writing on Instagram a shot. I was like, I know it's a visual platform. I know it's not like, people don't like reading on it, but I was like, you know what, maybe I'll give it a shot and see how it does. And I said, and I think at core, what it wasn't necessarily a bet on me gaining readership. It really wasn't that. It was more so me finding a space to kind of just write, right? But finding a space to write where I can connect. And I didn't feel like blogs in 2021 or 2020 were the way to go, because people don't visit blogs as much, right? They're just on social media, they're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They don't really have that time to kind of go to those platforms, right? Those other sites. And I just started writing, and it just started like connecting, right? And there was 100% a point where like I made my page private. I was like, ain't no one from work gonna find this shit. Oh yeah, for sure. Because I was like, I'm being so transparent and so honest that I'm like, shit, if someone reads this at work, how is this gonna affect me?
Yeah.
And, you know, it took time, you know, because again, this was just last year. So it took time. I think maybe like around the summer, as my writing kept growing and growing in terms of just like followership, there was like a little anxiety about like still, you know, like I would only leave my page like public on days I post, and then private like a week at like 3 days after. And it was literally strategic, and like, and I'm gonna be super honest with you. There were times where like I would see someone follow me from work, and I press block. Like I'd literally do it because I was like, nah, you ain't gonna read my stuff. Because
What
the
was
thing
it?
is, like,
Was it like something in particular, like a specific topic that you didn't want people to
no,
see?
no, it was just like I just felt like I was just being honest about things that like had to do with me and like dating and color. And it goes to what, you know, we talk about. I don't think anyone's ever fully, regardless of color, right? I don't think anyone's ever fully like, you know, just telling what's going on in their life and what they learned about at work, right? So it's not really just a color thing. But I think from a color perspective, you're also extra like protective of things. You're like, oh man, I don't want them to read this because it's going to change their opinion of me. And then what ended up happening for me was just that I just like stopped not caring, but like I was just like, you know what? Like what I'm writing here is my life, or was my life at some point. And I don't think anything that I'm writing isn't rooted in growth on some level, like me either learning from it, me being in the process of learning from it, or having learned from it, right? So I was like, if someone reads this that knows me as Claudio at work, sure, are they going to be surprised? Yeah. But at core, I said, like, I'm not writing anything that I feel like on any level is problematic. I think it's just honest. Um, and my, what I would consider like my work wife, she's a white girl, and she's like maybe 32 or 33. And she would always be like, hey man, I gotta follow you. I gotta follow you. Why don't you let me follow you? And like that's my homie. Like that's my homie for life, right? And I'll be like, nah, it's cool, like whatever. And I know, like, you know how people do. They always find their way to kind of find you on Instagram through boyfriend's account or someone else's account, right? Just to be like, I wonder what Claudio does on Instagram, right? So it was two of my homegirls, Erin and Victoria, and she was like, come on, like, what's the big deal? And I was like, well, like, you know, I kind of write about my life on there, and I don't know how you're gonna view me or whatever. She was like, it's whatever. And I just let them be, and they, you know, they followed me or whatever. And I think that was kind of like a step too, in a way, like me kind of letting go, like, and allowing someone, you know, close to me at work at least, to kind of just, you know, have at it and just be able to see what, and nothing has changed. You know, we're still the same people. She doesn't talk to me about anything related to it.
Yeah.
And not that I expected her to either, you know?
Nor maybe do you want to.
Nor maybe do I want to, right? And I think what was important for me was that, and I remember telling my therapist this, was that, you know, I've been like kind of managing who sees it and who doesn't in such a way. And now I'm sort of just like, you know what, whatever. Like I ain't writing anything crazy. People take it a certain way, then whatever. But I just felt like I was. It's not a game that you can manage, right? Because it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes you'll get 30 new followers and you'll only see like 2 of the people that followed you, right? But you won't see the
Subtle
other
flex.
28. Yeah, exactly. No, I'm not. No, I'm saying it more so like it's a reality, right? And like I don't want to just be like digging through my page, like, oh, she's following me, block, you know, and like I can't do that. And I was just like, you know what? I don't even write that much. I write like every few months, and I was like, you know, it's better for me from just like a mental perspective, just to let go.
Bro, the craziest thing about your post, I mean, they're dope. They're so deep. by the way.
Appreciate it,
But the
man.
craziest thing about your post, man, and you mentioned this already, is that Instagram is a visual platform. And like I'm even taught at work to create video. Like I advise my clients to create short form video, like GIFs, capture
Mhm.
attention quickly, etc. All that stuff. Like your posts literally go against every best practice on Facebook and Instagram, yet people stop, read, comment, show so much love. Like reading through the comments on your post like gives me goosebumps, because it's all full of like, yo, this is exactly what I was going through. This is exactly what I needed to like get through it. I'm still going through it. Like I'm sure you read through those comments and you're just like, that's why I write. You know what I mean? Like, do you get to, like, what are some of those feelings that you get, man? Because those comments in there are so much love, man, and also pain as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of it too. There's a lot of that in there too. It's interesting. Like when I saw it starting to connect, maybe like like mid last year, I was really surprised, man. I was shocked, actually. Um, and as many comments as you see, there's like people that'll like just message me and like really tell like a full
Yeah,
on personal story. And
yeah,
what I really got to the point with all of it was, and it kind of touches into another layer of just kind of like self analysis is, there was a point where I wasn't like fully like letting all these comments hit me. And what I mean by that is like sometimes like when you when you see a lot of people commenting on your stuff, you start not necessarily taking it for granted, but sort of being like, oh wow, great, thank you. Like I appreciate it. And you are grateful, but you're not really sitting with it and really appreciating the fact that like, hey, like you took time to write this for the last 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 days, and people are really responding to it, and being able to tell their own personal stories about it at the same time. And to kind of see like whether it's about dating, colorism, anything, parents, being Dominican, to kind of see like those comments come out of nowhere from people and messages come out of nowhere from people that you don't even know, who like will literally write you 3 paragraphs. Like there was someone that wrote me today about, I was on a podcast the other day, and I was talking about just like how sometimes we forget that our parents are their own people, right? And they had dreams too, but maybe they grew
yeah,
up at a time where it wasn't necessarily something that they could accomplish for whatever reason, right? Um, and someone was emailing me or messaging me, talking to me about like, hey, like, it really kind of helped me understand that like, you know, my parents are, came here, sacrificed for me, but in that sacrifice, they may have lost what they really wanted to do, right?
mm,
If they had the chance, right? Um, so it hits you, and I've learned to kind of like really sit with it, and really kind of like be grateful for for the audience that I guess I have, and also just kind of like the connection is really what it is. That's what you kind of spoke about at the onset, like you it's what you said. It's like you think that you're the only one going through it, and then when you find someone else, it's not like you're happy like, yeah, I got company, because it's still kind of like,
yeah,
depending on the topic, it could be a sad thing, right?
yeah, yeah,
um but you're still like, wow, like there's people that have their own experiences, and there's people that have experiences from both genders. It doesn't have to be a guy,
hmm,
it could be a girl too. And I think that's been the most rewarding thing. Like I'm not asking people to pay me for it, I'm not asking for donations, but the connection is really what it's all about.
yeah, 100%, man. I love that you're not even like finished growing, man. No one is, right? And you're
No, no,
even you, even you just said, man, like you just took a big step last year, maybe even just like letting more people see your Instagram profile, man. Like what's, as you look forward into the future, like what's one thing that continues to inspire and empower you to continue being your most authentic self?
um I think I think number one, it just helps me to kind of like, I think in the moments where you are able to kind of be transparent and authentic, um, when you get feedback or comments or messages, you actually put yourself in a position where you actually learn from others too, right? There's been so many situations where I've talked about like things that I've struggled with, where I'm working on, and I get a message from someone and they're like, hey, like, this is something that I tried, or this is something that I'm doing, and I've been able to kind of incorporate that into my own life and kind of improve. So that's kind of an example of like, really kind of pushing something out there, but also getting something from it back. Whether it's through connection, whether it's through like recommendations or whatever of the sorts. But for me overall, it's really just kind of there is a part of me, I won't lie, that's sort of like, and it touches on what you said earlier. That's like, I know this isn't a writing platform and I want to like keep growing and keep growing. And trust me when I tell you that my goal has never been like, oh, I want to have whatever amount of followers. Like, it's never been that. But there is also a part of me that would like to see how far I can go with it, like how far I can, because I'm sure there's other people on Instagram that write, like I'm not the only one on earth. But I just want to continue kind of seeing like how many people can really kind of connect with the work that I'm doing. And then, like I said, it's kind of like a scribble pad, or organized scribble pad, but a scribble pad where I'm just kind of able to like lay out things. And I think what I try to do for the most part is really find things that I feel are relatable, things that I feel like people are going through, some people are going through, and kind of, and it always doesn't have to be like a happy story, right? I think it's important for me to be like, yeah, this is some shit I'm struggling with, and yeah, just kind of like basic transparency. Obviously, I want to do or finish up the book that I'm working on colorism in Dominican communities. But outside of that, I think, the writing on Instagram will continue, and I'm sure it'll take different forms. But I'm not sure like which forms it'll take yet.